Well, good morning to all of our delegates here in Bahrain from 20 countries and to those many others in the Middle East and North Africa that are joining us online. Good afternoon to those in the Indo-Pacific also joining us online. And congratulations to those in Europe or in the Americas who are with us online at this time for them. I want again to offer my thanks to the Kingdom of Bahrain, His Majesty King Hamad, to Crown Prince and Prime Minister Salman for the tremendous support the Kingdom of Bahrain has provided to the IISS in order to facilitate this dialogue at this challenging time, and to their tremendous commitment, Foreign Minister Al-Zayani, to this Manama dialogue process. The event takes place over 3 days, but the process is conducted over another 362 days in a given year. As I said yesterday, all IISS data and analysis is wrapped under the overarching theme of the future of war, power, rules. Those three words and how their definitions evolve will define the geopolitical and geoeconomic future. Thinking strategically requires understanding the realities of these three nouns. Power is being wielded in new ways and through different means. Wars appear shapeless and without clear end, and rules seem fragile or out of date. This year, we bore witness to a cooperation deficit in international affairs. Any new multilateralism to improve on things needs to be intelligently designed and placed on sound legal foundations. We now swing perilously on the hinge between an old rules-based order that seems poorly maintained for contemporary purposes and a new order yet to be well-engineered and strategically designed. So this Manama dialogue will consider many of these issues against the background of new power shifts, turbulent conflict, and dramatic diplomacy of 2020. Little of this perhaps improved by the realities of the COVID-19 pandemic. In a moment, I'll open plenary 1 of the 16th Manama Dialogue on the theme Global Governance in the Wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. I only wanted to remind all of those attending, both in person and online, that all the plenary sessions at this conference are on the record, both the statements by ministers, but also the interventions from the floor. So I invite everyone asking questions online or from the floor to bear equal responsibility for the quality of their interventions as is borne by those who speak formally from the podium. Allow me to introduce, in the order in which they will speak, our three plenary speakers today. His Highness Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I've had the privilege of knowing him over a number of years. It was my pleasure to be in Riyadh last year with my colleague John Rain to speak to him in person only a few days after he was formally appointed as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And it was with the authorities of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that I early consulted in 2003 about the idea of having what was then styled a Gulf dialogue in the Kingdom of Bahrain. And those individuals then and all those since have thought it important that when speaking about questions of the region, that a dialogue be placed in the region. Since at that time, when we started in 2003, 2004, almost all the conferences about the Middle East were being held in North America and Europe, but not as frequently in this region. And so we wanted to establish this as an anchor for regional defense diplomacy to ensure that the voice of the region was properly heard from the region internationally. Dr. Kyung-wha, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Korea, equally I've had the pleasure of meeting her over the years at other events. She personally and her country deeply committed to the processes of multilateralism and a rules-based order, distinguished member of the G20, a country that earlier also promoted the ideas of a global Korea to ensure that an Asian voice was also consistently prominent in international strategic dialogues. I might mention that the chair of our International Advisory Council also comes from the Republic of Korea, so we ensure that that perspective is regularly in our internal discussions at the IISS to ensure that we have that point of view understood in our own internal deliberations. Miguel Berger is the State Secretary of the Federal Foreign Office, the Auswärtiges in Germany. We have worked a great deal with the Federal Republic of Germany over the years, and more recently have intensified our work with the Auswärtiges Amt. I think we conducted some 8 separate projects over the last 14 or 15 months with and for the Auswärtiges Amt, and that audition, I think, proved successful insofar as I'm able now publicly to announce that following deliberations in the Parliament of the Federal Republic of Germany, we will be getting substantial support to establish a permanent office of the International Institute of Strategic Studies, which will be styled the IISS Europe office in Berlin starting in 2021. And so now our international network is enlarging. We have our headquarters in London, an Americas office in Washington, an Asia office in Singapore, a Middle East office here in the Kingdom of Bahrain, and a Europe office in the Federal Republic of Germany, which we will open in the early weeks of 2021. So for me, the logic of this plenary one gathering is impeccable. 2 G20 countries, a G7 country, and great friends of the IISS. Before I invite Prince Faisal to take the floor, just a reminder that when you do seek to ask a question, all you need to do is press your microphone. Your light will turn green, but that does not mean your microphone is on. It just means that your name will appear on my screen as someone seeking the floor. When I call your name, I will be able to turn your microphone on. It will then turn red, and that's when you're able to ask your crisp question or make your concise intervention. And I'll probably take 3 or 4 questions from the floor and maybe 1 or 2 online before returning to the panel, and perhaps do 2 rounds of that kind in order to finish properly on time. So with that protocolaire preface, could I now invite Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud to make his statement to the first plenary session of this Manama dialogue.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. I'm happy to be here today joining you for the 2020 Manama Dialogue, and I would like to thank the Government of the Kingdom of Bahrain and IISS for organizing this gathering. This year has proven to be quite unprecedented, with challenges posed by a pandemic that risks leaving lasting mark both on state resilience and multilateral cooperation. Through collective action, we have shown how the international community can come together during times of crisis. I'd like to take this opportunity to discuss how the Kingdom sought to lead efforts to address some of the main challenges. In coping with the economic strains posed by the pandemic, countries took immediate action to minimize the impact. Locally, the Kingdom adopted a whole-of-government approach to tackle the impact of COVID-19, which included allocating 47 billion riyals to our health sector to take all the necessary steps to raise the sector's readiness, secure medication, operate additional beds, and provide necessary supplies such as ventilators. The Kingdom also heavily invested in technology and equipment that enabled us to conduct mass testing and contact tracing, meaning our hospitals were able to cope with incoming patients without being overstretched. As for dealing with the financial impact of the pandemic, the Kingdom focused on reducing interest rates, supporting private sector financing, enhancing banking sector liquidity by 50 billion riyals, and supporting small, medium enterprises, and postponing the collection of some forms of taxes, customs, and other fees. The unprecedented health and economic impact of COVID-19 put an enormous strain on people's lives and livelihood, and that has drastically altered this year for us all. It has made the task of leading the G20 this year even more challenging by exposing vulnerabilities which could not be ignored. It meant having to adapt two parallel, often intersecting tracks, both combating the immediate effects of the pandemic as well as advancing the Saudi G20 presidency's ambitious agenda. The Kingdom adjusted quickly to these challenges in order to host a successful G20, with all the engagement and working group meetings being conducted virtually and with minimal disruption. G20 leaders affirmed their commitment for coordinated global action, both in overcoming the current challenges and in looking ahead to our joint futures. To that end, the Saudi presidency convened the extraordinary Virtual Leaders Summit on the COVID-19 pandemic in March, the first time the G20 leaders have met virtually. The Kingdom was honored to lead G20 members and invited countries in an immediate response. Together, we agreed to concrete commitments aimed at protecting lives and safely restoring economies. Together, we committed to take the following measures: injecting more than $11 trillion into the global economy, pledging over $21 billion to support the international fight against the pandemic, including a commitment to finding a vaccine, extending debt relief to countries most in need, amounting to over $14 billion. Ensuring vital medical supplies and critical agricultural products could safely flow across borders. The Kingdom also announced a contribution of $500 million to support these global efforts and enhance preparedness. Additionally, recognizing the importance of coordinated global efforts to face pandemics, the Kingdom presented a General Assembly resolution on united responses against global health threats combating COVID-19, which was endorsed by 122 members of the United Nations. The Kingdom will continue to build on the spirit of cooperation and solidarity through enhancing multilateral frameworks. Given the multiple prospects of an effective vaccine, the Kingdom seeks to work with international partners towards ensuring a fair and speedy distribution of the vaccine globally and especially to countries most in need. 2 weeks ago, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia had the honor of hosting the G20 Leaders Summit. At the Riyadh Summit, world leaders committed to building a resilient recovery that is both inclusive and sustainable. Throughout its presidency of the G20, the Kingdom spearheaded such efforts. We went into this year's presidency with a theme of realizing opportunities of the 21st century for all, focusing on the aims of empowering people, safeguarding the planet, and shaping new frontiers. As a continuation of the Kingdom's ambitious Vision 2030 pioneered by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, this ambitious vision is nothing short of a project of national transformation, economically, culturally, and socially. It aims to reform our economy by diversifying revenue streams, opening up new sectors for employment and investment, such as tourism and entertainment, and embarking on major projects like NEOM, Gadi, and the Red Sea Development Project. Vision 2030 goes hand in hand with our continued strides in youth and women empowerment as we work on enhancing the quality of life for our citizens. Our efforts have not been immune to the disruption caused by COVID-19, but we push forward unabated. Vision 2030 is complemented by a commitment to regional security and stability, as well as a deep affirmation of our meaningful global leadership. The vision broadly remains on target thanks to the tireless work by the Kingdom. We believe this vision will have a ripple effect throughout the region, benefiting not only the lives and opportunities of Saudis, but also bolstering the prospects for regional and global prosperity. We are dedicated to bringing economic, social, and cultural transformation to the Kingdom. This coincides with fostering a regional environment animated by stability and cooperation rather than conflict and violence. To that end, the Kingdom continues to demonstrate its commitment to the diplomatic resolution of regional tensions, as well as strengthening global cooperation and multilateral frameworks to tackle the challenges we face today. Reflecting on the challenges of 2020, we can find solace in the spread of cooperation and support with which the global community responded to numerous challenges of economic hardship, provision of healthcare supplies, and getting stranded travelers home. This message of cooperation, partnership, and solidarity is much needed as we move towards conquering COVID-19. It also sets us on the path of introspection and a serious reconsideration of global preparedness to tackle future pandemics. Though the challenges posed by this pandemic weigh heavily on us, we must remedy the effects without losing sight of what is needed to build a sustainable future for all, leaving no one behind, particularly least developed countries. Global governance would fare much better by finding innovative mechanisms that pave the way for coordinated global response. Thank you very much.
Your Highness, thank you very much indeed for those remarks. And I think there's a number of lessons learned about managing the COVID-19 pandemic and invigorating more international cooperation as a result of the obvious requirement to create stronger cooperation given the global nature of this crisis that we've been facing all together over the last many months. With that, could I invite Foreign Minister Kang of the Republic of Korea to make her remarks. Thank you.
Good morning. Your Excellency, Minister Abdul Latif bin Rashid Al Zayani, Dr. John Chipman, Excellencies, distinguished guests. It is indeed a great honor to join you for this year's Manama Dialogue. I would like to thank the IISS and the Government of the Kingdom of Bahrain for the invitation. I'm delighted to be the first Foreign Minister of the Republic of Korea to engage in this prestigious forum, but certainly not the last, I hope. A growing web of ties have been forged between Korea and the countries of the Middle East over the past decades, and I'm very confident that the trajectory will accelerate in future years. We are at a time of profound change unleashed by the COVID-19 pandemic, but also by political transformations across the globe. In the Middle East in particular, tectonic shifts are taking place. The Abraham Accords is starting to reshape the political and security landscape, and economies are innovating to prepare for the post-oil era. Around the world, including in Northeast Asia, the strategic competition among the global powers is getting broader and deeper. I'm an optimist. Change harbors both risks and opportunities. The times call for proactive diplomacy to manage the risks and make the most of the opportunities for peace and prosperity. Of course, the immediate challenge we face is the COVID-19 pandemic, which continues to wreak havoc across the globe. With the recent news that the vaccines are on their way, the end of the tunnel seems within reach. But getting there will require much more global solidarity than the international community has been able to muster so far. Global governance was already at a low point when COVID-19 struck, with trust in multilateralism and the rules-based international order already greatly eroded. In the early weeks of the pandemic, discord and tension among member states hampered the WHO. just when it needed more support to forge a united front against the fast-spreading virus. The situation lingers, but the call for global solidarity and cooperation has strengthened over the passing months, as expressed by world leaders, including President Moon Jae-in of Korea, at global fora such as the World Health Assembly, the G20, APEC, and others. Indeed, to end the pandemic and prepare for the post-COVID-19 era, we need to infuse new energy into global governance with focused multilateral action. The Republic of Korea is a staunch supporter of multilateralism at global and regional levels and is ready to actively contribute to the endeavors. Korea, my country, was one of the first to be hit by COVID-19, and at one point in February, we had the second highest number of confirmed cases in the world. We are currently at 95th, according to the WHO, with a total number of cases at 36,915 and deaths at 540 as of today. We have managed to keep the virus at bay while keeping society open and preserving the freedom of movement of people, with social distancing and movement restrictions phased in and out as proportional to the risk of the spread. We have also kept our borders open as possible for international travel. We're all too aware that for us to feel fully safe again, the whole world has to be safe. The virus knows no borders, and even in countries that banned entry of foreigners, the virus has found its way in and spread. Meanwhile, the border closures have had stifling, even devastating effects on societies and economies. The digital tools and online interactions have made up for some of the loss, but hardly enough. COVID-19 is indeed a humble reminder of our interconnectedness as well as our shared vulnerability, and thus the critical importance of global solidarity and international cooperation. And I do believe some concerted action in the following areas is key to end COVID-19 and to strengthen countries and the global community to be resilient, inclusive, and better prepared for future crises, and there will be future crises. First, countries should spare no effort in supporting each other, near and far, in strengthening emergency health capabilities, including securing equitable access to diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. And in this regard, it is very encouraging that the world has been pulling together to develop and achieve equitable and adequate distribution of vaccines through the COVAX facility and AMC, led by the WHO, Gavi, and CEPI. Korea is an active supporter and participant in these endeavors. In addition, through our ODA Korea Building Trust initiative, we've also provided test kits, face masks to more than 120 countries. And we're also supporting many governments to strengthen their public health systems, including many of our partners in the Middle East. Secondly, we need to intensify efforts to strengthen the global health architecture centered around the WHO and place the safety and dignity of human beings at the heart of global governance for the post-COVID-19 era. We strongly support the WHO's role in generating technical and scientific expertise and assisting member states, as well as efforts to make the WHO stronger and more effective in tackling current and future public health challenges. And for this purpose, Korea and other like-minded governments have established a Friends Group in Geneva. And the key area of work in this regard is to upgrade the international health regulations with stronger compliance tools. We have also launched Friends Groups at the UN headquarters in New York and UNESCO in Paris to mainstream pandemic-related concerns across the work of the United Nations. And thirdly, as we scramble to sustain and restore the dynamism of our economies with expansionary budgets and stimulus packages, we need coordinated action across the globe, including by normalizing cross-border movement of people, starting with essential travel. From the outset, Korea has enforced only the minimum necessary restrictions on the cross-border movement of people and goods so as to soften the shock. We have also established fast-track procedures with many countries, including the United Arab Emirates, to streamline the arrival process and minimize quarantine upon entry for business people. And with many other Middle East partners, we are implementing various methods for exceptional entries. And as a result, work has continued in the many infrastructure projects that Korean firms are taking place in this region. And these will be instrumental for the post-COVID economies in the region. And lastly, we must better prepare for future pandemics by strengthening regional coordination. In my part of the world, President Moon proposed at the UN General Assembly last September to launch a Northeast Asia Cooperation Initiative for disease control and public health, inviting countries in our region, including North Korea. And we are wasting no time in getting this off the ground. We believe this initiative can serve to solidify regional coordination on public health and bring North Korea into a regional mechanism aiming to safeguard the health and safety of our peoples. It will also generate positive energy for the Korean Peninsula peace process, which is my government's endeavors to achieve complete denuclearization and lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. Ladies and gentlemen, it will take many years before the full picture emerges on the multiple consequences of COVID-19. But the key lesson is obvious. We must all work together. And from the onset of the pandemic, Korea has indeed been working closely together with many countries in this region to bring home our nationals stranded overseas, to provide testing kits and masks, to share experience and knowledge about the virus, and to institutionalize the cooperation with MOUs. Korea will continue the collaboration beyond the pandemic on a host of issues that connects us to this region. Finding common solutions to the challenges of climate change, transition to clean energy, terrorism, cybersecurity, AI, and emerging technologies will bring us closer together. In the changing global landscape, we also share the abiding mission of bringing lasting peace and realizing nuclear non-proliferation in our respective parts of the world, both with deep historical roots and very complex geopolitical dynamics. My government is firmly committed to work towards these goals through dialogue and negotiations, and we count on the support of all of our partners in the region. And you can count on us for the same. So I hope this aspiration is wholly shared by all participants gathered for today's dialogue. Thank you very much.
Foreign Minister Kang, thank you so much for those remarks, and especially for your call, which is in the spirit of the Manama Dialogue, for more extrovert diplomacy, for your endorsement of what the IISS has styled the need for more legal diplomacy to modernize the rules-based order, and also for your interesting statement about the experience that the Republic of Korea has had in opening its borders and ensuring that essential travel is still conducted. We know that that is a matter of, may I say, fierce debate in Europe at present. And so it will be very interesting in the dialogue to share national experiences on this so that we can discover how we can progressively underpin the positive forces of globalization even as we fight through this pandemic. With that, might I invite State Secretary Berger of the Auswärtiges Amt in Germany to address this dialogue. Thank you.
Yes, Minister, Al-Sayani, Mr. Chipman, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by saying, yes, Mr. Chipman, we are really delighted that very soon IISS is going to open its Europe office in Berlin, and I'm really looking forward to continuing our very fruitful cooperation. But let me also start by paying tribute to our hosts, the Kingdom of Bahrain, for the remarkable crisis management that you have shown in this COVID crisis with international coordination, but also a very proactive campaign among your population. So really congratulations for that. And let me add to this speech from Madam Minister Kang that we really admire the way how Korea was able to combat in a large country COVID, and it shows at international level that you don't need to be an authoritarian country in order to be successful. Open and democratic societies can achieve the same, ladies and gentlemen. This year we are celebrating 75 years of the United Nations, and we are at the same time fighting COVID as the biggest test of our generation, but also as the most serious challenge for the multilateral system. And as the Minister said, the erosion of the global governance has started before the COVID crisis. But the reason is not that multilateralism is failing, but that some of us are failing to support multilateralism. And that's why Germany, France, and other countries, among them also Korea, joined for the Alliance for Multilateralism. It's not a fixed group, it's a group which shares the interest in maintaining the rules-based international order in different fora and looking for reforms. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me focus today on different aspects of the challenges for the global governance, mainly health in economy, but also I would like to make some comments on regional issues. The pandemic has affected all of us. And it's the first time that a health crisis has become the dominant international theme for many, many years. It is linked to our lives and our livelihood. And I remember very well, Mr. Chipman, that at the Munich Security Conference in 2016, Bill Gates gave a speech on the risk of a pandemic, and he said maybe up to 30 million people could die. And I remember that everybody in the audience was surprised, but not many were listening about the risk of a pandemic. Now we have the recent data about the upcoming vaccine. We are happy that there is also a German company among them, BioNTech, together with Pfizer, but also many others. And this gives us more than a silver lining, really the hope that we are going to have a very effective vaccine soon available as a very important first step. But now, and it has been mentioned already, we need to achieve a fair and global distribution, an equitable global access to vaccines and therapeutics. This will be a crucial test in our view for multilateralism. And as Chancellor Merkel said during the special session of the UN General Assembly, we can only overcome this pandemic if all people get fair access. And in order also to quote Mr. Tedros from the World Health Organization, no one will be safe until everyone is safe. Let me use the opportunity also to commend Saudi Arabia, Prince Faisal, for leading the G20 countries through this very difficult crisis with a strong commitment and leadership. And I think that the Riyadh summit has taken very important decisions in order to counter the effects of this crisis. Some of them have been mentioned: the ACT accelerator, COVAX, the vaccine pillar. And really we want to encourage all to join efforts. And we need the states, but we also need the private sector to be part of that. And I share the analysis that we need to strengthen the World Health Organization. Germany has also worked through the WHO to distribute protective material, therapeutics, and everything else to many, many health systems which needed support. So we need reform, we need sustainable financing, we need collective preparedness for the future. And let me say that also very clearly, we need a thorough review of the origins of this virus. And it's long overdue that China allows the WHO to make this analysis. The second issue I would like to focus on is the economic impact, the social consequences, the increase of poverty and unemployment. Regrettably, we have seen that the pandemic has knocked out years of progress on the Agenda 2030. We are going to have 235 million people next year depending on humanitarian assistance, and 35 billion, the highest amount of money that has been needed in order to give the support. The G20, Prince Faisal, plays a crucial role, and we have seen that the IMF, through liquidity support, the World Bank, with debt moratoriums and others, have lived up to this challenge. Now we have to continue, and we need to give to those countries in need the necessary financial firepower. And let us not forget that there are other countries which have so far not been covered by the G20 initiative. And we also have to include the private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing the hardest recession since the 1930s. The European Union will need till mid-2022 to recover from that. But we have also learned, I would say, from our early mistakes. And one thing is to keep the borders open. In the second wave of the pandemic, we have always maintained the possibility of open borders for essential travel. When it comes to overcoming the crisis, Germany, as Council Presidency of the European Union, was able to organize a 750 billion recovery package, unprecedented in the history of the European Union. And this is something that will be available for all member states. Ladies and gentlemen, every crisis also is an opportunity. And here the opportunity is to build back better. Green technology will be at the heart of the European recovery, digitalization, the way towards climate neutrality in 2050. And let me add, we want to make really good use of the incoming new US administration under President Biden, because we see with this new US administration an opportunity to strengthen global governance, to overcome also this very strong antagonism between the US and China, which has had a negative impact on the global governments. These problems will not go away, but we hope that the US will come back to the World Health Organization, that they will come back to the Paris Climate Agreement and other international fora, and that we will be able to strengthen even more the G7 and G20. That's why Germany, Minister Maas, have offered a new deal for transatlantic cooperation in order to strengthen multilateralism and strengthen global governance. The pandemic, in our view, is a unique option to show that cooperation trumps national action. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to end here in Manama without some very short comments also on regional questions. Let me first of all commend those countries who have done the normalization process and taken up diplomatic relations with Israel. The UAE, Bahrain, also Sudan. This is something that we wholeheartedly support. We had in Berlin a meeting of the foreign ministers of United Arab Emirates and Israel, a very good meeting. And let me say also that with this normalization, we have the hope that this will give a dynamism also to the question of negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. we still need to bring forward the question of the two-state solution. We need to work for an independent Palestinian state, and that's why we are engaged in the so-called Munich format with Jordan, with Egypt and France, now that the quartet regrettably has been blocked. The second point I wanted to mention is that we hear very favorable news, and we support that for unity, future unity of the GCC. This would be, if this would make progress, let me say, that would be really a very welcome step, because I think we all need a strong and united GCC. The last issue I want to comment on, Mr. Chipman, if you give me the time, very quickly on Iran. We have seen that President-elect Biden has made very clear that he wants to rejoin the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement. We have seen, and it was a debate yesterday, a maximum pressure campaign of the US. You can see it as you like, but in our view, it has not delivered the results. Very limited success, but no change on the fundamentals. We think that this region and the world will be a safer place and a better place if we go back to full compliance of Iran under the nuclear agreement. This is definitely what we want to achieve among the so-called E3+3 or P5+1. But let me say that we also think that back to full compliance is not enough. We have to address regional security questions. We have to address the role of Iran in the region, and we also have to address the challenges which are posed by the ballistic missile program of Iran. So a lot of work ahead of us in diplomacy, but it's always better to work for diplomacy than for other issues. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
State Secretary, thank you very much for that statement, powerfully delivered. In the early part, your strong call for increased health diplomacy. We have tried to play at the IISS a small role in this as well, as we recently introduced the CEO of your very excellent Charité University Hospital in Berlin, that is famous for its professional treatments to our friends in the COVID-19 task force here in the Kingdom of Bahrain, and we hope that will also be a way in which cooperation between Europe and the Middle East on the technologies of dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and with your other partners also in this wider Gulf region, can be promoted. And I'm very glad that you took the time at the end to touch on the three big security subjects in the region: the Abraham Accords, the wider Middle East peace, and the challenges posed by Iran, and the wider framework that might be needed to establish an enduring settlement, if I can put it that way, with the Islamic Republic of Iran. I'm delighted to see many questions from the floor. My proposal is to take 4 or 5 of them in a group and then return to the panel. And so with your permission, I'll take them in order. First, from Bahrain, Hassan Al-Hassan, who actually is a researcher at the IISS here in our Middle East office. Hassan Al-Hassan.
Thank you, sir. My question is to His Royal Highness Prince Faisal bin Farhan. Your Royal Highness, we've heard positive indications on a possible end or a breakthrough, at least, in GCC relations and on the GCC rift. Does Saudi Arabia and the rest of the GCC states, do they have a plan, do you have a plan, to turn the GCC into a rules-based regional institution in order to prevent another breakdown in relations further down the line? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Sarah Stewart.
Thank you. Going back to coronavirus, vaccine hesitancy is high, including in the Middle East. I'd like to ask any of the panelists whether they're concerned about that and what's the best policy globally for the rollout. Do you think there's a place for compulsory vaccination, including, for example, schools, international travel? And how should the international community cooperate on these sorts of protocols?
Thank you very much. And from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Royal Highness Prince Turki Al Faisal.
Thank you very much. Mr. Berger, if you go back to the nuclear deal with lifting the economic and financial sanctions, why would Iran accommodate you by dealing with regional and missile issues?
Thank you very much. A powerful question from Japan and the IISS, part of our Japan chair program at the IISS, Ms. Yuka Koshino.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Minister Kang. So COVID-19 has also revealed that digitalization, accelerated digitalization, but it's also revealed gaps in digital governance. So in your view, what role should South Korea play as one of the global technology power in shaping the multilateral rules-making on digital cooperation and data security? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's an elegant and subtle way to refer to the 5G debate that has also become a geopolitical issue. Noor Hamid Al-Amer.
Hello, and it's great to be back in the IISS. I'm so sorry, I might take a little bit of time with my intervention, but I promise it'll be of value. So I think you know me
That's
well
encouraging.
enough, John. So Saud Faisal bin Farhan, the Foreign Minister of Korea, and Michael Berger. This is actually a question for all three of you. And it's a privilege, honestly, to address such a distinguished panel with so much economic strength and clout and influence. So we're in a unique space in time. For the first time in human history, technology can solve any issue on the planet. So when it comes to climate change, cybersecurity, agriculture, food production, you name it. And my question is simply, and John quite poignantly pointed out at the beginning of this session, that wars seem shapeless and there's a need for intelligently designed action and a new order, and perhaps something under a more conscious foundation. So my question is simply, in designing a better world, do we genuinely know where we are going? And just to reflect further on this, once we achieve global peace, and if you indulge me, if we achieve it next month, let's say, are we in the right mindset to accept it and to maintain it? And perhaps it's time that we ask ourselves that maybe honestly we did lose our way. And things happening in the global setting has shown and points in that direction that perhaps us as humans have lost something along the way. It could be just a matter of, the tools that were spoken about today are excellent in peacekeeping and have been and are brilliant, but maybe there's more tools we can put in our little toolbox and something that we need to change in the way we see things. And I just beg for your indulgence one last time, and I'll just quote T.S. Eliot's four quartets to close. For last year's words belong to last year's language, and next year's words await another voice. Thank you.
Thank you very much also for providing some literary diplomacy to animate our geopolitical thinking. Rim Muntaz.
Yes, good morning. I have a question for State Secretary Berger. You said that the pandemic is a unique opportunity to show that cooperation trumps nationalism, but we also saw that Germany this week has secured millions of extra doses of the vaccine from BioNTech, CureVac, and IDT, the first two of which the EU Commission already had deals with. So is Germany actually playing both games? Cooperation, but also nationalism. And on JCPOA, can you give us a bit more details on how Germany sees the sequencing? So you said that there's a need for Iran to go back to full compliance, but also that won't be enough, and there's a need to also address the bigger issues around Iran's role in the region. How do you see that sequencing happening? Should Iran go back to full compliance first, and then the Americans should lift their sanctions, and then a negotiation opens on the other issues, or anything else?
Well, that's already a very large menu. We have time for a second round, so don't worry. The 6 or 7 people who asked for the floor, you'll get a second chance. In this round, I might ask the panelists to speak in the order in which they originally spoke. So Prince Faisal, Prince Farhan, and then Dr. Kang and State Secretary Berger. The principal question to you, sir, was about the GCC as part of the rules-based order, and 1 or 2 other comments you might also like to make on the regional issues that were raised to you, Ms. Farhan. That's it.
Thank you. Excellent question by Hassan, and I think we are committed to strengthening the GCC and its mechanisms. King Salman, early in his reign, proposed an initiative to strengthen the integration of the GCC countries, and we are firmly committed to pursuing that initiative and working towards a much more integrated GCC unit, and I believe that that will deliver a very strong cooperative framework for the GCC countries and allow us to move forward together as has always been intended. So I would say that as we move towards a resolution of the rift, and we hope that can happen soon, we will emerge on the other side a much stronger organization, and we will be able to show, I think, the efficacy of these regional gatherings and how they can help support a global rules-based order.
Dr. Kang?
Yes. On the question of vaccine, would you make them compulsory? I think it's always better to give it the choice to the people, but you then need to provide the facts and the evidence that enables that choice. And I think at the global level, the guidance, of course, and the knowledge, and that has to be fed into the WHO so that the WHO can then be the global advisory board on that. But ultimately, I think democracies, liberal democracies in particular, would place that decision on individual health to the person. I think, yes, Korea is highly wired. I think, yes, the infrastructure, the digitized infrastructure was a very big part of our speedy response to the virus. But more important than any hardware, I always say, is the trust. If you have the trust, you can work with masks, just masks, and get a lot done, actually. We are now looking at other countries for success stories and failures, but it turns out there are lots of success stories in these non-digitized areas, where basically the tribal leader only had masks to work with, but as long as there was trust between the authorities and the people, it works. I mean, short of vaccines, the facial mask is your ultimate protection. And you know, in a way, it's ironic. We're in the 21st century, the pinnacle of technological progress. But what actually works in this pandemic is the mask, which probably people had centuries ago. So that's ironic. But it gets to the core of these crisis management, which is the trust. And you don't have the trust, none of this hardwired technology will matter. So I think we need to be humble about the nature of humanity, which is people think, people have ideas, and you need to provide the evidence and the facts so that that thought process leads to the right decision. Which gets me to the last question, and it was so many different philosophical questions wrapped into her question by this young lady. How do we design, or do we want to design a better world? I don't think the aspiration to be designing anything at this point would be the right tone setting. I think we really need to be humble. And so the idea of designing anything at the global scale is I have a hard time catching up with that question. But I would really press the point of this challenge of infodemics. I think infodemics, in fact, is much more dangerous than health pandemics, because infodemics, when you lose sight of the importance of facts and evidence, you don't have any anchor to decide which direction to go. And I think fake news, disinformation, misinformation, altogether, I think, diagnosed as infodemics, is something that responsible leaders really need to get our minds wrapped around. Because I think if we don't, I think we're already running behind this challenge. The pandemic, I think, has made us realize, especially with things such as vaccine resistance, it's the symptoms of how people have become so enwrapped in their own misinformed universes that it becomes very difficult to build consensus that informs policies and drives policy infodemics. I feel like we've lost too much time, and we need to really catch up at national levels, at global levels, and what do you do? How do you start? You start sharing information and facts. Basically, you start sharing evidence. I think in the middle of the pandemics, many countries have transparently, openly shared facts and what we were doing about it. Other governments have not been so forthcoming. But I think beyond the cooperation on the vaccines and the therapeutics, we really need to see the very basics and see, have we done enough to build trust in each other so that we know that our responses and cooperation is based on facts and evidence and the knowledge that comes from the scientific community.
Thank you very much. And on to State Secretary Berger. Between His Royal Highness Prince Turki and Remontaz, you had quite some challenges on the JCPOA issues. So why don't you give us a couple of minutes on how Germany sees how that could be designed?
Sure, with pleasure, but maybe let me first address this question on the vaccine. Yes, to this question about the national interest and cooperation, because I think both goes together. You have to make sure and do everything as a government that your nationals get the necessary vaccines, but you also have to work on the international cooperation. And I would say that with the 12 billion the World Bank is given, plus the European Union, plus many others, I think we are at least halfway on the financing of this of COVAX and this international vaccine architecture. On the JCPOA, I would say that we obviously have to also wait for the ideas of the new US administration. You might have seen the interview President-elect Biden gave to the New York Times. In our view, we have seen now non-compliance in important areas of the JCPOA over a longer period of time. So going back into full compliance, in our view, will not be enough. And my minister said yesterday that we have to update the nuclear agreement, the JCPOA. So some of the timelines, the research and development, which has been done, all of that means that we need an updated agreement. When it comes to regional security, obviously your question is very valid. What is the leverage? We just came now in Europe from the ministerial conference of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. And during the Cold War, this process of OSCE was one of the pillars to overcome this conflict and the Iron Curtain. What I want to say with that is that in the end, to address these challenges, you need regional security structures. I obviously know, and we all understand, that you can't copy things that have worked maybe in other parts of the world here to this region, but I think it's worthwhile thinking about regional security structures. And this is something here for the region to do. And obviously we are interested and we will be supportive of that. And in my view, issues like ballistic missile program, but also the role of Iran in the region can only be addressed by firm reaction, with sanctions if necessary, but at the same time with an offer for a regional security setup. So my expectation is, and you know, the time frame is not very long. We have elections in Iran mid-June. The new administration will come on the 20th of January, so the time frame is not very long, but at least we want to make some progress in the months ahead in order to move towards the compliance in the JCPOA, and then I would say work on an update. And in parallel, we need to tackle the question of regional security. That's the way I would describe it right now. It's impossible to give you more details because I think we all need to discuss that first with the new US administration.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to return now. I've got 4 or 5 questions from the floor. But before I do that, I'm going to ask one more question of Dr. Kang, because we've just had a question in from people who are participating online. And just to show how global the IISS is, we have a question now from the Deputy Minister of Public Security, Senior Lieutenant General Bui from Vietnam. And his question to you, Minister Kang, is your participation on this plenary represents the goal of gender equality. So can you please share how you develop gender equality in Korea and in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in particular? That from General Bui from Vietnam. So I thought that was worth airing.
Okay, let me work on that.
Yeah, you got to.
Give me a few minutes. So while you
We'll come back to you. We'll give you time to reflect on that question, though I'm sure you will have thought about it before, but we need a considered response to that. So back to the floor, Stephen Callan.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to ask His Highness Prince Faisal to give a little more detail about the recent discussions around resolving the dispute with Qatar. There were some statements made yesterday by himself, his counterpart in Qatar, and the Emir of Kuwait. I'm wondering if you can flesh out a little bit some of the terms of the agreement that have been reached preliminarily. And specifically, I think one of the key issues that we've been wondering about is whether Saudi Arabia would reopen its skies and its borders to Qatar. That's been a big concern of the United States and others in confronting Iran. And also whether the other members, the other allies that signed on to the boycott are also on board with this new direction. And if this is moving forward, what is Qatar? What is expected of Qatar for fixing and resolving this rift? Thank you.
Thank you. And from the IISS, our defense economist, Fenella Mugati.
Thank you. My question is for State Secretary Berger. It's regarding the impact on global development and the fact beyond the vaccine, will global institutions still have the financial capabilities to pursue global development goals and sustainability in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. And from the Republic of Korea, Sung-min Lee.
Thank you, John. My question is to Minister Al-Saud and to Minister Kang. Minister Al-Saud, if the Biden administration ultimately fails to convince Iran not to go nuclear, what steps can your country take to prevent Iran from going nuclear? And will Saudi Arabia at some point in the future consider its own nuclear weapons program as an active deterrent? To Minister Kang, I share with you that multilateralism will increase when the Biden team comes into office. But the pandemic has also shown that very large authoritarian governments have increased their hold on power domestically and have basically, at times, not paid attention to multilateral norms. How can South Korea, for example, ensure that multilateralism outlives very strong nationalistic policies? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from the U.S., David Gordon.
Thank you, John. I have a question for Minister Kang. And if you could expand a little bit more on the status of your country's outreach to Pyongyang, both on COVID issues, and if you could give us a little bit of a status report on the broader effort at denuclearization and whether there are signs of any further movement on the part of Pyongyang.
Thank you. And from Italy, Irene Mia, who's here.
Thanks, John. Yeah. So my question is on one of the perennial global governance challenges never really mastered, which is migration. So migration flows are obviously bound to resume and to intensify post-pandemic. This is going to bring about a host of global challenges in terms of global health, food security, stability. So my question is there any fresh thinking emerging on how to tackle actually migration? And is this crisis a catalyst maybe for really achieving some kind of more effective global governance structure for that? Thank you.
And from the UK, IISS Japan Chair, actually, Robert Ward.
Thank you, John. A question for Minister Kang. A number of like-minded countries are now articulating Indo-Pacific strategies to support the rules-based international order in the region. What opportunities does South Korea see for integrating its new Southern policy and indeed broader policy into these evolving policy frameworks? Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll just take two more before coming back to the panel. Gaith Abdullah.
Thank you, John. My comment is to Minister Faisal about the normalization we're seeing in the region. It's being hailed as peace, but there was never really that much of an issue on that side. What we're seeing in the UAE is economic integration with Israel like we've never seen with any nation before. It's amazing. But already, what we're noticing though is that the Palestinian side of the issue has been ignored or forgotten almost. And I've been lucky enough to have been put in touch with a number of progressive Israelis who have made me aware of the fact that Palestinians are actually well integrated or integrated at least into the Israeli economy. And there's the ability to perhaps promote and encourage Palestinian-friendly or Palestine-friendly tech commerce startups. And when Saudi does, if and when they normalize, I would encourage them to consider Palestine-friendly economic opportunities. And I'd end with a question, what do you think is the greatest challenge in the GCC crisis?
And the last question before we return to the panel, and just as a warning, we'll start with State Secretary Berger, then Dr. Kang, and conclude with His Highness Amos Yadlin from Israel.
My question is to His Highness Prince Faisal. When and if and when the Saudis will join the Abraham Accord process? Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got 5 or 6 minutes. State Secretary Berger.
Yes, thank you very much. SDGs and the financing, yes. I must admit this is a huge concern because we already see with the overwhelming humanitarian needs that it is difficult for countries who are struggling with their own economic condition to come up with the necessary financing. And our concern is really that we might lose years of development within the Agenda 2030. So I think that before we don't achieve a full recovery, a full economic recovery, it will be difficult to invest the money which is needed to come up. On migration, yes, this is a huge concern because obviously, and we can see it already now, that in many countries unemployment has gone up, there is social unrest. So once this COVID crisis is over, there is a high risk that this might cause new waves of migration. International architecture, I think this global compact on migration is the best framework we currently have. And I think we should continue to develop that, and also the work we are doing in the European Union with Africa and with other countries in order to create legal opportunities for migration, but also try to build up necessary capacities, investment in those countries to create opportunities in order to reduce the necessity. I think so far on the questions which were posed to me.
Thank you. Dr. Kang.
Yes, several questions, and I'll try to be brief about on the point about being the first woman foreign minister in the Republic of Korea. Yes, I am the first, and I have to say it's basically the political will of my president, who decided to appoint women in key ministerial portfolios at the beginning. And I think that political will is what enables the accelerated pace of gender equality settling in society. It's not that I don't have issues about the lack of equality in some points, but the best I could do is to do my best and let my performance prove itself. But I think there was a question about the digitalization aspect of our COVID-19, and I sort of passed that point over. But we are working with other countries to share our experience in using the digital tools to be a part of the tracing system in particular in the COVID-19 situation, and many countries in this part of the world as well. I think the question about countries turning nationalistic, authoritarian governments exploiting, I think was the word, using the multilateral fora to, perhaps that wasn't the exact expression, but I think I get the point. But it's not just authoritarian governments. I think democratic governments are also being increasingly swayed by nationalistic, populistic sentiments that make them turn more inward. And it's not an easy challenge. In this context, how do you find the momentum and the life to give further boost to the multilateral context? I think in a way the pandemic has made us realize how necessary that is. And so I keep getting back to the point of the importance of science and facts, and not letting this inherent desire among political leaders to spin it, if you will, sometimes, and to put our own interpretations into that, to resist that, and use this crisis as an opportunity to generate that solidarity. I also place a great deal of hope on the younger generation. I think the younger generation are not as hung up about nationalism and borders as we are. So even at around the UN, at government level, we really need to do more to give voice and the space and participation in decision-making process to the younger generation. Indo-Pacific Strategy, our new Southern policy, I think our basic position is that we can work with other strategies that are based upon the principle of inclusiveness, transparency, and openness. And as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned, because of ASEAN's location in that geographical sphere, ASEAN centrality is also very important. So we work very closely with our US counterparts, and every year we produce a fact sheet of where our new Southern policy and the US Indo-Pacific strategy comes together towards concrete projects of collaboration with other partners in the region. So that's my answer to the last question. Oh, the important question about North Korea, if I may. North Korea has not been very responsive to our offer of help on the COVID-19 front. I think this challenge, in fact, has made North Korea more North Korea, i.e. more closed, very top-down decision-making process where there's very little debate on their measures in dealing with COVID-19. They still say they don't have any cases, which is hard to believe. So all signs are the regime is very intensely focused on controlling the disease that they say they don't have. So it's a bit of an odd situation. But we stand ready to offer help on COVID-19. And as I've said, we've invited them to this regional cooperation on public health. On the North Korean nuclear issue, as you know, 3 years of very intense efforts in close collaboration with the U.S. to keep North Korea engaged. The engagement is stalled a bit after the Hanoi summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. They couldn't come to an agreement on the nuclear deal, and the talks have been stalled since then. But that doesn't erase the progress that has been made over the past 3 years, which is, at the end of the day, the three countries at the highest level have committed to complete denuclearization publicly vis-a-vis the international community. So as we prepare to work with the Biden administration, that will be the basis on which we consult with our U.S. colleagues and then try to revive the engagement with North Korea on the nuclear issue, as well as on the South-North track and the larger regional interlocutors to build lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. We still only have an armistice, a very fragile, tentative peace that we really need to replace with a lasting, permanent peace through a peace accord.
Thank you so much. So Your Highness Prince Faisal, the clock says you have 7 minutes, so take the time that you like to answer the question that were posed to you, and then we'll close the session. Thank you.
Thank you. So on Qatar, as I've mentioned, we have seen significant progress in the last few weeks, which means that we are now hopeful that we can reach a final conclusion very soon, one that will be satisfactory to all parties. And it's important to note that we have always worked very closely with our partners and continue to do so, and that remains the case, and the resolution will be one that involves all parties to the dispute. And I am hopeful that we will be able to announce the details soon. Regarding Palestine and Israel, and also whether we will at some point join the Abraham Accords, I think there are two things that are very much linked in our view. For us, it's now critically important that we focus on getting Palestinians and Israelis back to the negotiating table, because only a negotiated settlement that delivers a state for the Palestinians within the lines that are, I think, globally understood will eventually constitute a Palestinian state, will deliver true peace in the region, and that should be the focus for now. We are, as we have always been, as we were through our proposal in the 2002 peace plan, and even in 1982 in Fez with the Fahad proposal, completely open to full normalization with Israel. We think Israel will take its place in the region, but in order for that to happen and for that to be sustainable, we do need the Palestinians to get their state, and we do need to settle that situation. I just want to pick up on a hopeful note that Minister Kang mentioned about the pandemic and how it has reopened our eyes to the need for cooperation and multilateral coordination. And I think I agree with her, although I hope that we don't revert to our short-term memories and forget how without working together, really, we could not have overcome the pandemic, and we are still we see every day how much we need to cooperate and work together, whether it's in vaccine development, vaccine delivery, putting the global economy back on track. Therefore, I hope we've learned the lessons and we will remember these lessons for the foreseeable future. Without global cooperation and without making sure that we are all focused on the future, because we all live on this planet together, we will not have a future. And that's, I think, I'm hopeful that her analysis will ring true and we will refocus our efforts on working together for a better future.
Marvelous. Well, thank you very much. I want to ensure in 30 seconds that all of you, in the typical way, thank our three panelists for engaging with the Manama Dialogue with such strategic intent and with such a vigorous commitment to the dialogue for which this summit is famous. And also say to you all that we will now break for a coffee. We'll return at 11:15 for the second plenary session, where we'll receive Said Badr bin Hamad bin Hamoud Al Busaidi, the Foreign Minister of Oman, Dr. Abdul Latif bin Rashid Al Zayani, the Foreign Minister of Bahrain, and the Minister of National Defense of Canada. But before you depart for coffee and return at 11:14 for the second plenary, please warmly thank our panelists today.